Last year, there was a whole bunch of debate on lefty Twitter regarding whether Starbucks workers are proletarian or not. This thread by Logo Daedalus in particular was shared around a bit. It read, "The definition of proletarian matters because it distinguishes reactionary unions of bourgeois service work from proletarian labor which is unionized. The Amazon union is proletarian. The Starbucks union is not. If you don't understand this, you never will." Society does not need Starbucks workers. Society actually does need Amazon workers. That's why Amazon workers are treated worse and need a union more. Service workers are not proletarians. Bartenders don't need unions. LMAO. Society does not need Netflix workers. Society needs potash, fertilizer, grains, minerals. Society needs to move these material goods in real space. These are where proletarians operate, at the base of the supply chain, where they actually hold the economy itself together. Now, a lot of people might say that this take is so bad that it doesn't even merit a video response, and it did already receive a lot of criticism, but I have seen several instances of people peddling similar talking points. So I think it's one example of a more widespread confusion regarding what a proletarian actually is, and using it will allow me to clear up some basics that a lot of people are still unsure about, as there might be a lot of people who, while not agreeing with this tweet, might not know exactly what makes it incorrect. There are a lot of cultural stereotypes regarding what a proletarian is, stemming in part from some of the imagery passed down to us from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Some people believe that you're not proletarian unless you're a hot, muscular guy with a hard hat. So, in this video, we will take a look at what classical Marxist theory actually says. Before we do that, I'd like to thank Critique of Polycon, whose Substack article was the main inspiration for this video. This video wouldn't exist without him, so if you enjoy it, please check out his work as well, which I will link in the video description. So, in a footnote to the Communist Manifesto, Engels put forth a very straightforward definition of proletariat. The proletariat is, quote, "the class of modern wage laborers who, having no means of production of their own, are reduced to selling their labor power in order to live." Notice that this definition says nothing about the content of proletarian labor. It doesn't specify what concrete type of work proletarians do, whether industrial or service work or otherwise. It also says nothing about whether the labor is essential to society or not. This is because Marxist analysis is about social relations, and what matters in defining the proletariat is the social form under which their labor is placed, namely that of the wage. So, proletarians have two essential characteristics. First, they are deprived of their own means of production, and secondly, they sell their labor power as a commodity on the labor market in order to survive. This already allows us to make some distinctions. Some people seem to think that anyone who works with their hands is a proletarian, but a farmer who makes a living working on their own farm is not a proletarian, because they own their own means of production, and therefore do not need to sell their labor power for a wage. However, if that same farmer loses their farm and comes to be employed by the agricultural industry for a wage, they then become proletarian. The nature of the tasks they carry out might be roughly the same in both situations, but it is because of the social form under which they work that they have went from non-proletarian to proletarian. Similarly, a small business owner, even if they do a lot of the work around their business, is not proletarian, because they own their own capital and are not employed as a wage worker. But it is quite possible that they will employ proletarians to work in that very same business. So, apart from the incoherence of the very notion of bourgeois service work, as if someone serving coffee for minimum wage has anything in common with the owners of capital, there is also nothing in the formal definition of proletariat that inherently excludes service workers. It doesn't say anything about real space either, as if Starbucks workers do not operate in real space anyway. But there is also another matter, the question of productive versus unproductive labor. It is true that, according to Marx, not all wage workers are productive laborers. And so some people of similar disposition try to drive a wedge between industrial workers and service workers by arguing that while baristas are wage workers, they are not productive workers. But how does Marx actually define productive labor? He definitely doesn't define it based on what society needs, which is, after all, a pretty vague criterion. Because what society needs will widely vary according to time and place, and of course depend greatly on how you define a need in general. Marx himself never makes a distinction between needs on the one hand and mere wants on the other. Logo Daedalus says that society needs Amazon workers, but it's unclear to me why this should be the case. Amazon was only founded in the 90s, and it isn't primarily used to ship items essential to life, nor the raw materials that the Twitter thread lists. Does an Amazon worker stop doing productive labor if they're shipping, say, Marvel merchandise? What about the sweatshop worker who produces Marvel merchandise? Logo Daedalus says that Amazon workers are treated worse because their labor is essential to society, but some of the world's most mistreated workers produce things like Barbie dolls. Is their labor not productive because society does not need Barbie dolls? And what about nurses? I think it's reasonable to say that our society does need nurses, and yet, according to Logo Daedalus' definition, they wouldn't be proletarian because they neither produce material goods nor transport them. Trying to define productive work according to what society needs leads to a whole bunch of intractable problems, but it's also completely irrelevant to the matter at hand. It's important to understand that Marx's analysis of political economy is, first and foremost, trying to understand capitalism specifically, with all of its internal workings. It's not trying to define what society needs or doesn't need, or which workers are more praiseworthy than others. It is simply trying to understand how capitalism functions internally. This is why he says that productive labor in his analysis is defined from the standpoint of capital. And here is his simple definition of what makes labor productive. Quote, "Since the direct purpose and the actual product of capitalist production is surplus value, only such labor is productive, and only such an exerter of labor capacity is a productive worker as directly produces surplus value." So, a productive worker is that worker who produces surplus value for a capitalist. In other words, that worker who, through their labor power, not only produces enough value to cover the cost of the wage they are paid, but to produce in addition a surplus of value which is then converted into profit for the capitalist. It is this very capacity of labor power to produce more value than is paid for it that makes it worth investing in, and thereby makes possible the very existence of capitalism itself. To put it simply, productive labor is that labor which directly makes the capitalist richer than they were before investing in that labor. Notice that, once again, this has nothing to do with the concrete nature of the work performed, only its social form, that it produces surplus value, regardless of whether that surplus value is materialized in the form of tractors or grain or coffee and pie. And Marx is extremely clear about this. Quote, "From the foregoing, it is evident that for labor to be designated productive, qualities are required which are utterly unconnected with the specific content of the labor, with its particular utility or the use value in which it is objectified. Hence, labor with the same content can be either productive or unproductive." So, to go back to the example of the farmer, so long as the farmer owns their own farm, they are not producing surplus value for a capitalist, but they are doing that if they are employed as an agricultural wage worker. Logo Daedalus mentions that Netflix workers are not proletarian, a relevant thing to consider in light of the recent writers' strike. Well, more than once, Marx specifically mentions writers as potentially being productive workers. Quote, "A writer is a productive laborer not insofar as he produces ideas, but insofar as he enriches the publisher who publishes his works, or if he is a wage laborer for a capitalist." And elsewhere he elaborates, quote, "Milton, for example, who did Paradise Lost, was an unproductive worker. In contrast to this, the writer who delivers hackwork for his publisher is a productive worker. The Leipzig literary proletarian who produces books e.g. compendia on political economy, at the instructions of his publisher, is roughly speaking a productive worker insofar as his production is subsumed under capital and only takes place for the purpose of the latter's valorization. To clarify, valorization in Marxist terminology refers precisely to the phenomenon we've been talking about, the process by which the value produced by labor is transformed into profit. Marx continues, quote, "A singer who sings like a bird is an unproductive worker. If she sells her singing for money, she is to that extent a wage laborer or a commodity dealer. But the same singer, when engaged by an entrepreneur who has her sing in order to make money, is a productive worker, for she directly produces capital." And in Capital itself, Marx writes, "A schoolmaster is a productive laborer when, in addition to belaboring the heads of his scholars, he works like a horse to enrich the school proprietor. That the latter has laid out his capital in a teaching factory instead of in a sausage factory does not alter the relation." As can obviously be seen from the wide variety of examples, all kinds of work can be productive. It has nothing to do with whether it's industrial or service work, nor whether it's essential for society or not. What matters is whether that labor is employed in order to produce surplus value so as to generate profit. It is that labor which makes the accumulation of capital possible. Marx says that even a clown can potentially be a productive worker. Quote, "An actor, for example, or even a clown, is a productive laborer if he works in the service of a capitalist to whom he returns more labor than he receives from him in the form of wages. However, if that same clown, working independently, comes to a kid's birthday party in exchange for a direct one-time payment, he is in that situation not a productive worker. If a circus owner hires a clown to come to his kid's birthday party, he is paying the clown from his revenue. But if that same circus owner employs the clown in his firm, he is then paying him not from revenue, but from capital. Hiring a clown to come to your kid's birthday party is an expenditure that leaves you with less money than before. But hiring a clown to work for your company comes with the possibility of acquiring more money than you had before, receiving more value from the clown's labor power than you had invested in it. That's what makes the latter productive. Another aspect of the distinction is that when I use revenue to hire a clown as an unproductive worker for my kid's birthday party, I am paying for a concrete use value that the clown provides. In this case, entertainment. But the capitalist hires productive laborers not for the sake of a concrete use value, but for the sake of the abstract capacity that labor power has, the capacity to generate profit. The circus owner acting as capitalist doesn't hire a clown to be entertained. He does it first and foremost to turn a profit. To take another example, if you are a musician selling your services on Fiverr, people pay you only for the sake of receiving a use value, for example, a song composition. However, if with the very same skill set you are hired by a media company to produce commercial jingles and TV stock music for a wage, you are now producing not just use value, but value with a capital V. In other words, that value which is converted into profits, and your labor thus becomes productive. It's important to note that there are also workers who, despite being hired by a business for a wage, are not actually productive workers according to Marx. This is how Marx views financial and commercial workers, like bankers or stockbrokers. A financial planner or a financial analyst, for instance, may be hired for a wage, but they do not technically produce value. They only manage, process, and distribute value that has been produced by other workers, or decrease the amount of time it takes for a productive cycle to complete. There's a lot more active debate regarding the nature of financial and commercial work, and whether it's accurate to say that it produces no value. In Marx's view, there are forms of work and even entire companies that do not produce value but only facilitate its circulation, or aid in the valorization process. In other words, they are part of the circulation sphere rather than the production sphere. But Starbucks workers definitely do not fall under this category. The final misconception I'll address is the idea that in order to be a productive worker, a worker has to produce tangible goods, that surplus value can only be materialized in a quantity of objects that lasts beyond the process of production, say a warehouse full of tables. But this isn't true, as Marx points out when talking about the transportation industry. Quote, "What the transport industry sells is the actual change of place itself. The useful effect produced is inseparably connected with the transport process. This journeying, the spatial movement of the means of transport, is precisely the production process accomplished by the transport industry. The useful effect can only be consumed during the production process. It does not exist as a thing of use distinct from this process, a thing which functions as an article of commerce and circulates as a commodity only after its production. However, the exchange value of this useful effect is still determined, like that of any other commodity, by the value of the elements of production used up in it, labor power and means of production, plus the surplus value created by the surplus labor of the workers occupied in the transport industry." Marx makes a couple of things very clear here. A commodity does not have to be something you can touch. It can also be a process, an act, in other words, a service. It doesn't produce a material object, but it is still a material process, just as boiling water and grinding coffee beans is a material process. The act of transporting people and goods itself can function as a commodity, and the transportation workers engaged in this process produce surplus value, and so are exploited in order to harvest more of it. In the very same way, service workers produce surplus value, even if they do not produce a tangible object you can store. And the reason this is possible is, once again, because what matters in Marxist analysis is social relations and the social form under which human activities take place. So, to summarize, the distinction between industrial work and service work, and the distinction between work essential to society and work that is unessential, not only do not align with each other, they also do not align with the Marxist distinctions between proletarian and non-proletarian labor, or productive and unproductive labor. The proletariat is the class of people who, having no means of production of their own, are forced to sell their labor power in order to survive. And productive workers are those workers who generate surplus value for profit. And this is important not only for readers of Marx who want to interpret him correctly, it's important for anyone who seeks to understand the inner workings of capitalism, which you can't do through moralizing distinctions about what society needs or doesn't need. And last but not least, it is important for anyone who, having understood the workings of capitalism, seeks to resist them. We will get nowhere unless we organize around common interests, and to do this we need to understand the nature of class. It's no coincidence that the people who exclude service workers from the proletariat are also some of the same people who support the MAGA movement, or sympathize with small business owners but not baristas. Those who seek to obscure the social nature of the proletariat, or to drive a wedge between large sections of proletarians, whether consciously or not, are helping only the ruling class. And that's not Marxism. And now I'd like to thank my patrons, who fund my unproductive labor on Patreon in exchange for a concrete use value. Apply Quine That Doesn't Work on 37th Call, 404 Error, Just Undo It, A Sociology of Tarot, Andre Oliva, Archive Transients, Beetle Scratches, Celsius Enjoyer, Christopher, Daniel Zotner, Evie Rosk, Eric Owens, Evangelos, Francois Yue Wu, Harbin Moths, Hong Kong Aesthetics, John D. Pagani, Jones Indiana, Kotochny, Katy Perry is John Bennett Ramsey, Clement Fies, LMD24 Strain, M. Lim, Marco Rochetto, Matthew Richards, Max Bendick, Nathaniel Lark, Paul Winfer, Polecat, Prostitucci, Rachel Ann, Radical Q, Satan Birder, Sky, Stack Smyrner, Tendies123, The Empty Set, Venez, Victor Redco, Who Else But the Prince of the Shokan, Zim, as well as all of these wonderful patrons. Once again, I would also like to thank Critique of Paul Econ, many of whose points I parroted in this video. He is a lot more well-versed in Marxist critique of political economy than I am, so I do recommend checking out his work. If you would like to have access to reading material, video scripts, and occasional supplementary video notes, you can have all of that if you pledge as little as $1 a month on my Patreon. If you do so, you also get to vote on what my next video will be. I know that for a long time now I've been planning to do a video on left-wing terrorism, but I ultimately leave it up to my patrons to select the next video topic, so make sure to join if you want to affect that outcome. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're having a good day. Thank you.